So, I'm sorry I haven't been here. I'm Louis Johnston. I'm a professor in the econ department. I haven't been here all day, unfortunately. I really would like to, but I've been in a two-day seminar, workshop. We're trying to come up with what to call it for our department. So, as you can imagine, that's been a lot of fun. We like each other, but not that much. Takes a little bit. So, I'm really glad that we're talking about these things because digital technologies in the humanities and social sciences is something that, to me, has always been there, and now it's coming to the fore. In particular, I'm a quantitative economic historian, and this whole phrase of big data is something that, to us, is just old hat. We've been doing things like taking 1 out of 10,000 record samples out of the census since the 1950s and running them on giant IBM computers and things like that. So I'm just glad that everybody's starting to get into this game because it's a heck of a lot of fun. So today what I thought I would do is tell you a little bit about the project I've been working on over the last 5 years. And the motivation for it was, first of all, I want to get students involved in research. I want to get students involved in not just learning about economics, but actually doing economics in general, and in particular doing quantitative economic history. Until a few years ago, we were actually one of the only places in the United States that had 2 quantitative economic historians on the faculty. John Olson retired, but he and I were both trained in this. So we pushed this idea a lot. So we've done a lot of undergraduate research projects in quantitative economic history, and I wanted to continue that tradition. Secondly, one of the things that's been part of my research over the last 20 years or so is developing better and additional economic facts and data. The project that I worked on prior to this one was developing annual estimates of GDP for the United States back to 1790. And so this kind of builds on that because I had learned about a lot of the sources that the US government collected and things that you can do with them. So more economic facts and better economic facts that are available not only to students but to the larger research community. So let me start with the undergraduate research part. This is the practice that the American Association of Colleges and Universities labels as one of their high impact practices. Okay, so undergraduate research is something that I know everyone in this room, I'm sure, is encouraging, but I think we can't take our eye off the ball. We need to keep pushing that idea and encouraging our students to do research because everybody else is going at least as fast as us and probably faster. For example, I've had students applying to grad school over the last 3 years. It's getting to be expected. Of course you've done undergraduate research. The question is, have you published it yet? Is it in a journal? Is it in a working paper? So we need projects where students can join them and start contributing to them. It's going to take too long for them to develop them on their own. So that's one of my motivations for this. And as I said, I want them to learn how to actually do economics. I don't want them to just go to a website and say, oh, well, data just magically appears. Right? That's the way most people think. You Google it and, oh, there's the numbers. I want them to get their hands dirty and really learn how to do it. And one thing that's unique to economics, this is starting to change, is that basically developing data is looked down upon. That's what kind of the lower, not so sharp economists do. Right? The cool economists, they're the ones that take the data and create these wonderful econometric models and do all of these sweeping hypothesis tests. The Steve Levitts of Freakonomics fame, for example. They're the ones who have the cool stuff. Well, the data come from somewhere. And so I want to encourage the idea among my students that developing original data is just as important as getting famous, coming up with some kind of hypothesis test using that data. So, over the last 5 years, I have had 4 students working with me over the course of the summer as summer research assistants, and then have done their own projects. The first one who started this all off was Catherine Gaddis. Does anybody have her for a student? She was fantastic. She was a double major in economics and history, and she did her senior economics thesis on US-China merchandise trade between the Civil War and First World War. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Another student was a double economics, and I believe either peace studies or political science major, Anastasia Okaneva. And she looked at the same kind of thing that Catherine did, except she looked at the trade between the United States and Russia between 1867 and 1913. Aaron Peller and Danielle Perry over the last couple of years have worked with me to try and get a sense of what did the entire universe of exports and imports, but especially exports from the United States to other countries look like between the end of the Civil War and the First World War. What was the United States exporting? What were we known for? What were other people buying? And so they did senior projects on different aspects of that question. So what have they found? What have we learned? Well, here's the source that we've been concentrating on. Ever since 1828, the Department of Treasury creates this report called the Annual Report on Commerce and Navigation. It's now been superseded by other reports, but the same basic data have been collected annually since then. And in particular, what I've focused on is collecting the data on exports and imports by country and by commodity. So for example, I can tell you all the stuff that was exported to and imported from England. I can also tell you how much wheat was exported from the United States every year and how much was imported every year. I can also tell you the dollar value of all of the exports to Great Britain and the dollar value of all the wheat. And I can also tell you how many bushels it was. Some years it was hundredweights, some years it was bushels. That's one of the problems you got to deal with. So just saying that out loud, I hope gives you a sense of how much there is there. I mean, as an economic historian, this is this is a great source. This is like hitting an oil gusher, right? You could pump this for years. And so, in a sense, that's my idea, is to use this for years. Here's why we care about that. This is a table out of the leading textbook in American economic history. Okay, and it reports, all right, the geographic distribution of U.S. exports by different groups of years by geographic area. And then there's a paragraph there that talks about this and says, unfortunately, we cannot say anything more about this because the data are too difficult to work with. Well, not anymore. Okay, not anymore. We can actually get down to the level of the detail. Now, I know nobody can read this, but this is just a visual aid. Have you heard of the Hathi Trust? Okay, it's an organization that has digitized millions of images and books. What they have done is they have digitized all of these commerce and navigation reports. And so for a particular year, here's a page, and I'm going to zoom in on it a little bit in a moment. The exports from the United States for a year, for example, consist of 60 pages like this. So take 60 times however many years you want to do, that's how much data is available in these reports. So for example, let's zero in here. Russian possessions in North America. This is from Anastasia's work. Oh, I want to find out how much stuff is being exported from the United States to what's now Alaska. Well, $63 of manufacturers. Okay, but you can do this now by all of these geographic entities, right? How much is being exported to the Dutch West Indies in terms of leather, both in physical volume, pounds, and in dollars?
Was this stuff tracked for tariff purposes? Is that why it's so careful?
Exactly. I forgot to mention that. Yes, here's the reason why. In fact, one of the nice things about tariffs is you got to count everything because you want to tax it. So, and what's nice though about these data is that they include both untariffed and tariffed items. So they basically measured everything as it went in, as it came into the country, and as it went out. But yes, there's a situation where tariffs are actually a good thing. Probably one of the only ones that I can think of. Now, the people who wrote the textbook, trying to remember their names, Walton and Rockoff, what they said makes sense if you look at this and you say, well, yeah, I mean, I can't possibly collate all this information. This is too difficult. But one way that you can do it is you can do it the way that Catherine did it in the summer of 2014. She concentrated on just US-China exports and imports, and she did them by hand. So yeah, exactly, whoa. So she went down, she found the line for China, and she recorded all of the data for every year into Excel spreadsheets. So for example, you could actually put together a chart, like this is right out of her work. You could actually say, all right, here's the Chinese share of US foreign trade from the end of the Civil War till the First World War, both exports, which are in blue, and imports, which are in red. So how big was the China trade? Well, we can actually answer that question. Now, we can also do that for Russia. Here's what Anastasia did. So what? Who cares? Well, it isn't enough just to have more economic facts. I think it's important to have better ones because we want to tell better stories. So let me tell you what got me started on all of this and how my students' work fits into it. It involves this guy. Many of you, if not all of you, know who this is. James J. Hill, the robber baron, railroad entrepreneur, has a giant house sitting up on the bluff above downtown St. Paul. If you read James J. Hill's writings, one of the things that he was obsessed with was, and I put this in quotes on purpose, was the Orient. From the time he was a teenager, his dream was to travel to the Orient and connect the goods of what we would now call India, China, and Japan with the consumers of North America. This was his dream to do this. In fact, again, I know you can't read all of this, but he writes about this in a letter in 1898. He says, I believe there will be a commercial development on the Pacific Ocean in the next 20 years which will surpass any commercial growth the world has seen in the last 1,000 years. China and Japan contain nearly 1/3 of the population of the globe, and the Chinaman, I should have a little Sikh there, just like I have here, while his education and civilization is different from ours, is commercially speaking capable of the greatest development. He's dreaming big. And in fact, that's what we have today. Right? Here's the Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railway, which connects the interior of the United States with Seattle, Tacoma, and Portland. We've done exactly what he said, and in fact, that's what he set out to do. In 1892-93 and then in 1896, he sent representatives to Japan and China to get a bead on what the trade looked like. And they sent back reports to him, both written reports and, if you go in the archives at the Minnesota Historical Society, very long telegrams after the Pacific Telegraph was completed. They all reported roughly the same thing, which was there are great business opportunities to be had, and especially these opportunities are good connecting North America with Japan. So here's what he proposes to do. Let's see if I can use this. All right. Here's Minneapolis-St. Paul. In 1882, his railway, the Great Northern, ends in Montana. By the time he gets these reports, he embarks on a building project to extend it all the way out here to the Pacific coast. And the idea is we can load American products at anywhere along the line, but especially manufactured products and things like flour in Minneapolis-St. Paul, which of course comes from the wheat that's grown up here in the Dakotas. Ship it to the Pacific coast, put it on ships, sell it to the Chinese, sell it to the Japanese, sell it to India, and then import products from those places. Now, of course, I could just sell it, put it on other people's ships, but I'm a big shot, James J. Hill. I'm going to have my own steamship company. So as part of the plan, he also starts building his own steamships. He originally used Japanese shipping companies, but he wanted control. So he built two of the largest steamships in the world in 1900. They were named the Minnesota and the Dakota. But maritime historians have concluded that even before they were built, they were outdated. At least this is their hypothesis. They say they were way too big and too slow. What he should have done was built smaller ships that were faster. The reason why this matters is because by 1910, Hill had concluded the history of our trade with the Orient is a tale of lost opportunity. By 1910, he had concluded, well, I was wrong. Why? Well, one possibility is this hypothesis. He just screwed up. You should never have built such big ships. They were too slow, they were too big. He just blew it. Another hypothesis that an economist historian has put forth is he said, Hill knew about railroads, but he didn't know about ships. He tried to apply cost control to ocean shipping in a way that wasn't going to work. It would work in railroads, but it wouldn't work in ocean shipping. Hill's preferred explanation was the Canadians did it. The Canadians subsidized their steamships and the US wouldn't. I would have won. I would have been able to take advantage of this if the Canadian government subsidies had been matched by the US government subsidizing. And in fact, he regularly went to Washington to lobby for such subsidies. Never got them. I think all of these are wrong. And that's how I got started on this project, because none of these have quite rung true. And so one way to start looking at that, oh, and I forgot, here's another version of the second point. The ICC prevented actually taking advantage of owning the rail and the ships. I think it's that he didn't look at the market carefully enough. He didn't actually look at what the demand for goods was in China, Japan, and India, and what the relative goods that people in the United States wanted from those places. Well, how do you learn about that? You have to go to the data. You have to go to the data and find out what is it that we were actually exporting and importing. And then ask, did Hill understand the market well enough? Or did he just not understand what was going on in terms of exports and imports at that time? Because one of the things that intrigues me a bit, and I put this in for an economist audience, I'm sorry I forgot to take it out, but we use something called the terms of trade. Terms of trade measures how favorable it is to export versus import goods and services. And if this orange line, which is the terms of trade with China, was steadily going up, it would make sense for us to be exporting. Well, I don't know about you, but I don't see it going steeply up. So that's one thing that nobody's ever computed before. We've never had that information. Well, Hill didn't know. He should have looked at this. Another thing he should have looked at is, well, all right, what do the Chinese want? His hypothesis, if you go back to his memoirs, was we could ship raw materials like cotton and wheat to China and Japan. They would then manufacture products from that, so they would mill flour for their own use and for export. And in particular, they would produce cotton textiles, which would then be exported. Well, at first, it looks like maybe he was right. This orange line here, if you go into those reports, tells you how much cotton, both raw and manufacturers, are actually going out of the US. But here's what Catherine was able to do. You can go into the data and ask, how much is raw cotton? How much is manufactured stuff? The orange is the manufactured. They don't want raw cotton. They want cotton cloth. Hill didn't build ships to ship cotton cloth. He built these big giant hulks to send raw materials. He didn't understand his market. Now, that might seem kind of arrogant of me to say that, but one of the things that you'll find if you go to the James J. Hill Library in St. Paul, which includes his books, are copies of the commerce and navigation reports from those times. He had these data right there. He just didn't look at them. What did the Americans want to buy? They didn't want to buy cotton cloth or cotton or shirts or things made from cotton cloth from China. They wanted silk, which is in blue, and they wanted tea. Again, he didn't build his ships to import that kind of stuff. They were slow. In fact, after Hill's death, they scrapped the ships, started leasing ships from Japanese companies, and became one of the biggest shippers of silk in the United States. They had special trains that would load the silk in Seattle and speed it to Chicago and on to New York within 3 days from it hitting the port. But Hill couldn't seem to get that through his head. Now, what's nice about these detailed reports is that you can go deeper. You can ask what other kinds of things were the U.S. is the U.S. exporting or importing from. Some interesting ones that I found was hides and skins, a big import. There's a project I'm trying to get a student to work on. What is going on there? Why was that such an important import from China? Wool. That surprised the heck out of me. What's going on? Chemicals, drugs, dyes, and medicines. There's a spike in here. What's going on in there? Okay, there's all these stories that students could work on and tell stories about. So, my conclusion provisionally these days is that it was a lost opportunity because Hill himself and the people who worked with him didn't look at the data carefully enough. They weren't really looking at what the trade looked like rather than what they wanted it to look like. And so one of the things that students and I can investigate is why was it really a lost opportunity? We can tell that story in a way that's much more satisfactory because we'll have more economic facts and better economic facts. So, thank you. Questions? I kind of skimmed fast because I know we're at the end of a long day. So please ask whatever.
Is there a possibility, so, we look at the numbers, from, let's say, 150 years ago, to build a dynamic model so it's adjusted for the inflation whenever someone is looking at the data, or is that?
Well, this is one of the reasons I wanted to present, and I'm so glad that you invited me to, is because this project to me cries out for people who know how to do that kind of stuff. Like, I want to find someone in computer science to help me properly do the database for this stuff, because right now it's all in Excel spreadsheets. That's so crude. That's not the way it should be done. But I don't want to learn how to write Python better, right? I don't want to learn how to do databases better. I mean, I'm an economist. We have comparative advantage. I specialize and I trade for that with somebody else. So yes, I would love to have that. So that's one of the reasons I wanted to talk was to make a pitch. I want to make a pitch for, if you want to work with me or if you have students, I would love to do that. That would be fantastic.
What's the market for this data?
Well, right now there's a group of economists actually at the University of California, Davis, who have something called the Prices and Incomes Project. And they are developing a database of international trade back as far as they can go. And right now there's a big hole for the United States. So they would like to add this to that collection.
And that hole is filled simply by someone pouring through them and typing the numbers into Excel?
Basically. We could get credit. We could get credit for that as an institution for filling that hole.
So then the next step, though, would be to convert that into something like Gapminder, where you can pick your variables and create animations and all that. So is that something
that's what I would love to do
collectively, or does that need to be done elsewhere?
Well, that's another reason I wanted to bring it up, because maybe there's somebody here or somebody you know who does know how to do that. Because to me, that would be not the equivalent, but like we're known for the Bible. We could be known as the place that has the website that has all of the U.S. international trade data, and whatever you want to do with it, just go to that website. There it is. We could have computer science students, you could have history students, you could have economics students all working together on this. So to me, that's the long-term 50,000-foot vision of this.
You said all the reports have been digitized. I mean, is that not digitized, not as photographs, quote, or is, I mean, and can you read the data off of that?
Okay, well, I left that out. Again, because it's the end of the day and I didn't want to take up too much of your time. Let's go back to that sheet I showed you.
Yeah.
So here's what my TAs, research assistants, whatever they wanted to be called, here's what they had to do. Those are just photographs.
Okay, that's
So we used a program called Abby Fine Reader to take these photographs and turn them into Excel spreadsheets. And it takes about an hour to do each page.
How accurate is
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say, how accurate.
Pretty accurate, but that's the next step that we've been working on, is cleaning the data. And it literally involves comparing what's on this page with what we've got in the Excel spreadsheet. And it's very tedious and time consuming. And that's another idea I had, is that a lot of people who do work in digital humanities and social sciences will put that kind of material up on the web and have it crowdsourced. People do that with the census, for example. Well, we could do that with this.
Or you could pay mechanical Turk workers to do it for pennies a.
Yeah, well, that's what the people at UC Davis said, why don't you just send this to India?
Yeah.
And I said, well, I don't have an NSF grant of $500,000 to $1 million. I teach at a liberal arts college. So. But that's the answer to your question is, yeah, they got really good at Abby Fine Reader, and so especially Aaron and Danielle did a huge amount of work on this. They would basically work on one part of another project that we were doing while this was running, then started again, and over the last 2 years we got it all digitized, all turned into Excel spreadsheets. It is, but they did a very good job. The other project that fits exactly like this, if you have students or colleagues who are interested in it, is that I have a grant from the Minnesota Historical Society, and I'm doing a project on something called the Minnesota Resources Commission. And how that's related to this is that the Minnesota Resources Commission in the late 30s, early 40s put together a report on Minnesota manufacturing that does the exact same thing, except for all of the products produced in Minnesota back to 1870, using the manufacturing censuses every 10 years. So we could put together a database of everything that was manufactured in Minnesota from I think it's the 1870 census, all the way to the present, which would be really cool. And what's nice is that stuff is actually typed. We wouldn't have to take it out of this stuff. We could actually use it. And I don't know if this has come up today. I don't have my phone with me. Has anyone used the new Excel app on your phone? Excel now has built into the Android and iPhone version, it's a little camera icon. Aim it at a page, hit the camera icon, and it will suck in that table into an Excel table right through your phone. So I tried it at the Historical Society, and within about 5 minutes I had 10 pages of these reports in Excel already. So there are so many opportunities. Well, thanks for the opportunity. It was fun.
Thanks, Louis.
Yeah.